Placeholder testing. Placeholder testing. In chapters 28 and 29, we are going to talk about governance. And on the discussion board, the questions are, what is clinical informatics governance? Why is clinical informatics governance important, CIG? And who is CIG, clinical informatics governance, of value to, how, and why? The text defines clinical informatics governance as health IT governance and states or reads the process of establishing an overarching structure for health IT in organizations, including establishing goals and objectives, creating policies, standards, and services, and developing mechanisms and processes for the oversight, enforcement, and coordination of policies, standards, and services. Page 633. Wow, that's a mouthful. And I also noticed that it talks about health IT governance as opposed to, I like to use the term clinical informatics governance. And so I took one of the definitions from an old SIG charter mission statement. And what it says is, through interdisciplinary collaboration, the Clinical Informatics Governance Committee will provide leadership and guidance in the integration of information technologies within clinical practice, thereby improving the healthcare of those we serve. So what they did was took their governance definition or reason for and combined it with their organization's mission, and I like that. So I'm going to give you the definition of clinical informatics governance, and the text makes mention of it too, being the difference between establishing operational processes versus establishing an effective governance structure that appropriately owns and uses those processes. So the difference between clinical informatics governance is the difference between change control and change management. Many organizations talk about change control. So how are we going to put this new upgrade or new fix? We've turned a screen from red to blue, or we've taken policy and procedure and we've put it online. How are we going to incorporate that from just being the actual technical of the change to more complex, more sophisticated actions and functions? I'd like to compare that to the difference between old plain change control and clinical informatics governance, or change control and change management. Take a look at this SIG governance committee example that I've given you guys, and I know it's very busy. But I took this again from a project. Clinical informatics governance is both used to control, manage, operationalize, standardize both projects, healthcare IT projects. Clinical informatics governance is utilized to prioritize initiatives that are IT or healthcare information systems technology related. Clinical informatics governance is also used to foster collaboration of interdisciplinary teams so that we're all making a decision on how best to use the technology. So it's not just nursing that's rolling this out or saying this is how we're going to use the EMR, and it's not just the docs, and it's not just lab, and it's not just radiology. It really is a coordinated effort. And so I wanted, and this was a really, really, really good example of a SIG committee structure, and it literally starts from the top up with the chief operations officer and chief information officers and just the CIOs in the C-suite, and then goes down to incorporate the directors of departments, goes down to incorporate the ancillary departments, and then it starts to talk about. So I am using a matrix from a clinical informatics governance committee that I once helped form. And I think this also furthers the definition of what clinical informatics governance is. Again, your text talks about the difference between establishing operational processes versus establishing an effective governance structure that appropriately owns and uses those processes. So again, I'm going to use the analogy of change control. So let's just say change control is about how we're going to roll out technically the new EMR. Clinical informatics governance is not just about the technical aspect of it or the nuts and bolts and how we're going to have this many desktops or buy this many pieces of hardware, or we're going to have this kind of functionality with the EMR. Clinical informatics governance is more sophisticated by taking the structures that need to manage the change or need to manage the tools and the technologies. Clinical informatics governance establishes responsibilities, accountability, and even limitations of authority. Clinical SIG establishes the alignment of work to be done within the organization. It establishes the alignment of both the goals and the resources and the prioritization. So take a look at this matrix and you will see we start with the top down. So from the executive sponsors, from the chief information officer, the chief clinical officer, whether that be the VP of nursing or the chief medical officer, and then comes down to, and again, this is just one example, a co-chair from IT, information technology, and a co-chair from the clinical area. So depending on the project, depending on the initiative, it might be a co-chair from nursing, it might be the co-chair clinical, being from the medical staff. It might be a combo of. And then you have the directors from each department represented, whether that be from critical care, surgery. This was a clinical informatics governance structure matrix for a huge EMR of a 700-bed hospital. So there needed to be that interdisciplinary collaboration and that interdisciplinary representation on the clinical informatics governance committee. And think about this committee being responsible for things like initiatives that had to do with the electronic medical record and safety. How are we going to prioritize? We've got so much in this organization that we want done. We've got so many things that our mission is calling us to do, but we've got safety, we've got quality initiatives, we've got meaningful use initiatives, we've got optimization. We want to make sure that the systems we're using really are as sharp and give our users the bang for the buck that they need and provide our patients with the best quality of care. We've got financial initiatives. We've still got to keep the lights on. We still got to be accountable for the finances and the budget. And so think about the Clinical Informatics Governance Committee as being part of that overarching structure that helps with that. So it's not just about buying a clinical information system and rolling it out to the users, but it's also how are you going to manage that monster? How are you going to determine prioritization? How are you going to determine that, yes, this is something that impacts safety? Yes, and so it needs to, be brought up further. Or they're always competing initiatives. They're always competing projects. So who determines what goes first? Who determines the priority? Who determines that this really is the connection for the organization? Clinical informatics governance is responsible and involved in that, and the overarching organization, overarching designation, overarching committee structure, so to speak, that will be accountable and responsible for those kinds of things. Okay, for me, this slide is both the SIG definition and value. So I've combined it or bridged it. And for the definition, again, what is clinical informatics governance? As I said, it's about guidance, it's about resources, it's about ROI, return on investment. It can also be defined as improving quality and outcomes and input and processes and efficiencies. It is both, should be, have the representation of administration and physicians and clinical nursing and the IS department and the vendor of the software vendors. It should be about who controls and how we pay for and how we authorize hardware, infrastructure, software, optimization, training, and support. Also involved in clinical informatics governance, and part of the definition is improving quality and outcomes, input and processes and efficiency. So for me, this slide is both bridging the definition of clinical informatics governance and the value. So clinical informatics value, why is it important? That's the other discussion question. What does good governance of enterprise information and technology accomplish in the healthcare sector? I guess that's the question I'd ask. So it provides the necessary responsibilities and practices to ensure benefits realization optimize resources, and optimize risk while ensuring an organization is compliant with local laws and regulations and providing value to stakeholders. That, again, that's a big mouthful, but that is, in a nutshell, or part of clinical informatics governance's importance or its value. It's about, again, I'll say it again, return on investment. None of these organizations intend to be spending zillions of dollars and not showing value. Clinical informatics, by sharpening the tool, so to speak, will help show value, but you've got to be able to coordinate, organize, and prioritize those resources. Value realization. And then this quote I got from, I want to say it was from a hymns reference. Is that where I got it from? Final discussion question is clinical informatics value continued. Who is SIG of value to, how and why? So I can go on and on this one. Who, the clinician using the information system or the information system technologies, the organization rolling it out, the organization that's managing it, the organization that's paying for it, the patient, by virtue of having a robust and sophisticated electronic medical record that that patient's clinicians can access and input his or her data. How? Structure, formal processes, consistent decision-making, and prioritization are some of the ways that clinical informatics is of value. And why? Again, I said it before, we're talking about change management, we're talking about efficiency, we're talking about connecting an organization's mission to its margin, we're also talking about prioritizing. So those are some of the reasons why SIG is of value: the who, the how, and the why. Thank you.